Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage this afternoon's keynote speaker, Mr. Alex Roy.
These are not for show. I actually can't see without them. Thanks very much for having me. I have to say I'm actually shocked at the lucidity and intelligence of what I heard in this last panel, because I go to a lot of such events, and generally they're not as good as this one, especially Mr. Polzin, who amazingly said so many things that are in my presentation. I can carve out 10 slides, which leaves only 73 slides to go. And luckily, I'm the last person of the day because I'm going to go over, but I promise will not be boring, even if you disagree. So, how many people have seen the movie Cannonball Run? That's excellent. How many people have seen Wall-E? Excellent. Okay, so I'm here as an ambassador of the old world and human driving and the human id. Has anyone seen Forbidden Planet, the old science fiction film? Not so much. All right, well, you should all go see that because you'll understand it by the end of this presentation. So I absolutely, totally believe in an autonomous future. I believe autonomy is a good thing. I am not in any way defending human driving, but I'm here to say that despite everything we've heard, that there is an element that is largely overlooked, and Mr. Polzin referred to it in just one line in one slide, and that's the human ego. And human nature is a tough nut to crack. So I think there's a huge opportunity that the entire self-driving industry has totally missed. And before the policymakers in this room invest billions or trillions in building infrastructure or paying for solutions which are really just, they're not solutions, to pay heed to the story I'm about to tell, which is partially my story, but it's not really just my story. So let's get started. There we go. So for those who have not seen the Cannonball Run movie, there was a race across the United States which took place from 1971 to 1979 in which groups of vehicles filled with semi-professional drivers would go as quickly as possible from New York to Los Angeles, and the police would chase them, and there'd be all kinds of shenanigans, and then it ended. Now, the route was from the Red Ball Garage in Manhattan to the Portofino Inn in Redondo Beach, which is 2,811 miles. And the times in the early days hovered around 35, 36 hours. And in 1979, they ended around 32 hours and 51 minutes. Now, this is all a bad idea and requires disguises. So here is one of my early disguises where I dressed like a police officer. There's no law against dressing like a foreign police officer, in this case Canadian Mounties, but without the ceremonial jackets. This was a practice run where I was arrested in a German police uniform. But we learned quickly that Spanish police uniforms are more attractive because they mimic the colors of American construction personnel. Later, we dressed like Italian police officers, which was very popular. And then we learned that it was just best not to sticker the car at all. And this was the final result, a BMW M5 festooned with GPS, night vision, laser jammers, and everything you could fit in the car. I'm not a race car driver, but I do know that data is a good thing. And so we put everything in the car you could possibly fit. You want to talk about situational awareness. I think we had 11 devices and phones on the dash. We learned that it was a little safer to build them into the car, and that was what it looked like when we finally went across. And at night, a nice clean-up interior looked like this, because if you get pulled over, it's best not to have all these devices on the dash. You get a ticket for obstruction of the dash, which we did once. We were not, let's just say we're very prepared. We had a lot of research into fuel economy and target consumption. This was the final drive plan, which we did not carry in the car, because it's like basically handing the indictment to the police. In the event, you'll notice the projected time was 31 hours and 7 minutes. This was the chart my lawyer drafted of the statute of limitations, and we have some members of law enforcement in the audience, and also the tolling clock, which if you're an attorney, you understand what that means. Here I had an intern who was a fan of mine who happened also to work for the Jersey Turnpike Authority and gave us the location of all the police on the date we went across. That's very helpful. So as you see, life always finds a way, just like Jurassic Park. Look at this. As you can never trust computers. Here we are at 161 miles an hour, totally safe, even though the tire defect warning has gone off, which is clearly defective. I shouldn't have included that one. Let's remove that slide. And this is a picture taken from the spotter plane flying overhead, which located police for us and would give us the latitude and longitude so we could avoid them or just slow down and drive past. So the final time was 31 hours and 4 minutes. That time has since been broken because I'm not the first or the last person to think that human nature is more important than the law or safety. But we were very proud of our record because we never had an accident and we got virtually no tickets in 11 years of doing this. Which brings us to the question of safety. Looking back, I couldn't help thinking to myself how much safer it would have been if I'd been in a self-driving car. But then I thought, wait a second, that doesn't address my need and desire to do this. The human id must get across country. And it would have been a lot safer, actually, if everyone else was in a self-driving car and I wasn't. So I started thinking, like, how can I make that happen? Because there's a lot more time to be shaved off of 31 hours while I'm still alive. So thinking about this, and realized that autonomous driving has a moral and ethical argument that cannot in any way be denied. And I also was a big fan of Fight Club. Has everyone seen Fight Club? That's it? Okay. So in Fight Club is a great line, which is on a long enough timeline, the survival rate of everyone drops to 0. So replace everyone with everything, and there's nothing that lasts. And there's absolutely no reason that in some point in the future, humans should drive at all. There's literally no reason that they should, except because of human nature and the desire to satisfy the id. So I began thinking, when would this possibly happen? And like, what makes sense? Bob Lutz, formerly of GM and pretty much every manufacturer in the world, said that it's going to happen within 20 years, which is impossible, because even if 100% of cars sold tomorrow were autonomous, the timeline makes no sense. There are 274 million cars on the road in the United States, and there's an 11 million car per year turnover. So even if 100% were autonomous sold tomorrow, it would take 16 years. Therefore, you have to add at least 20 to that just for a generational shift. Even if you mandate it, it's going to take 10 or 20 years to pass all the laws and regulations to overcome human nature. People are very tough customers. And we are not one nation, we are 50 states. Each one is literally a different country when it comes to culture of driving. So one has to deconstruct, understand, or even create a timeline for this transition. One has to think about why people actually drive and deconstruct the id. So why do I do the cannonball run? I totally identify with my car. And if you look at the history of car design, you can see very much that car is part of our identity. My story begins with James Dean driving this car, and then my father coming to America and saying, well, if I look like James Dean and I have a car like this, I'll really be a player. So there's my dad with his. And next thing you know, he met my mom, and he had another Porsche. And next thing you know, in that same car, I'm being brought home. So there's a history of, as you can see, history of, you know what the history was of. And then here I am playing with cars, so it's all very obvious. It's in the blood. Me practicing, and me driving today a Morgan three-wheeler, which is the most dangerous and poorly engineered vehicle of all time, still legally sold on U.S. roads. I drive it every day in New York. So, Will Wright. Has everyone played The Sims? SimCity? We're in a room of policymakers, transportation, and logistics, and where are the hands for SimCity players? Okay, better. So I wrote my college thesis on SimCity and deconstructing the algorithm behind the growth patterns and decline patterns in that game. But unbeknownst to most people, Will Wright, the creator of The Sims and SimCity, also at age 26, competed in the Cannonball Run race and won. And he drove cross country in like 33 hours. So he's a pretty lucid thinker on transportation and driving fast illegally. And he says something very interesting in an interview. He says that no one ever says my car had an accident until like last year. Until last year, in the history of the car, people would say, I had an accident. Because the car has in effect become your body. That the car, according to Will Wright, was the original analog mind-machine interface. And he's completely right. Until Tesla Autopilot arrived, people started saying things like, oh, it's defective, my car crashed. I mean, what a lie that is. It's completely a lie. So let's think about the history of car design and what it says about human nature. Here's the most beautiful car ever made, the Jaguar E-Type, which is in the MoMA. And you cannot deny that it resembles an organic body member. You can't deny that it looks like something. You know what it is. Okay, you can't deny that. And then look at this. This is a Pagani Zonda. You cannot deny this is an organic form which resembles a woman lying on her stomach who's just woken up, about to get up. You can't say it doesn't look like that. This is a 911, another very organic form and a very old and popular design. This is a Citroën SM, which is both kind of resembles a male and female body part at the same time. It's French, it makes sense. This is a Morgan Aero 8, which is a terrible car, but I love Morgans. And you can see why this company, which should not be in business because the cars are terrible, is still in business because it appeals to our sentimental kind of memory, this vestigial need to the past and organic forms. They're still in business, and that says it all. So what we drive says as much as how we drive, because people sometimes own sports cars and drive like cowards, or they own terrible cars and drive like maniacs. So that there's a diagram of this, and self-driving cars are nowhere on this chart. So who we are and what we can do is also expressed by what we drive and how we drive. So how many people here have read the book Traffic by Tom Vanderbilt? Oh, that's really bad. Room of policymakers and self-driving. Everyone must go out and buy the book Traffic by Tom Vanderbilt. It has nothing to do with self-driving cars specifically, but everything to do with it because it explains the psychology of traffic. And he refers to the way we drive as a form of speech. So there's a film called Rendezvous. Has anyone seen Rendezvous? The Ferrari goes through Paris. Riley Brennan, of course, he's seen it. This is a 1976 film, which is the equivalent of an automotive snuff film in which a Ferrari, or we think it's a Ferrari, drives from one end of Paris to the other in 9 minutes, running every light. There's no dialogue or special effects, and nearly kills 25 people. It is awesome. And everyone, it's on YouTube and Vimeo, but you should really get it on DVD. I think it's like $50 and well worth it. And at the end, well, you're wondering, why is this person doing this? And at the end, well, I'm going to give it away, but it doesn't matter that I'm giving it away. Miss Gunilla Frinden, Miss Sweden 1967, is waiting for him at the end, and they kiss. But it must be seen because the reason this film resonates with anyone who's really into cars is because it's this expression of a final id through the vehicle in motion across a city to find this love. This film would mean nothing if there wasn't something essentially real and true about the human need for agency in control of a machine in motion. So, transportation, yes, we go from A to B, we're transported, but there is obviously something else happening when we get in a car, and there's something else happening based on the cars we buy. Because a car is essentially not just transportation, but it's also transformation. This car says one thing, and we all know what it says. And this car says something else, and we all know what it says. This car says one thing and does one thing. This car does the same thing, but is a convertible. It says something else about the owner. It's also more expensive as a convertible, which makes no sense. But people are willing to pay more money for this, even though it does exactly the same thing. We don't have to say we like the styling of a Tesla Model X, but you can't say that it's not cooler once it does this. We don't need this. We want this, or some people want it. So, I'm sorry, we can't have this conversation without Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud talks about the two drives in life: Eros, the life drive, eat salad, buy nuts, be healthy, love your spouse, your kids, good, plant a garden. The death drive: kill, mine, make that mine, steal, kill, mine. So, advertising of everything in the world only has two messages. It doesn't matter what the product is. There are only two messages in advertising, but especially when it comes to cars. Do you love your children? Volvo, minivan, Volvo, electricity. Gotta have the Volvo. Now, every product lineup's got everything in it, so all of love of your children is now fully commoditized. We all know it. In self-driving cars, that's the only message there is. There's no other message. And the other message of all advertising is, well, we'll get to that, because this is, do you love your children? This is the other message, which is, have more sex. That's it. And eventually, when you've driven enough of these, and you've had enough sex, you have to love your children, and then you buy the other one. That's it. That's the whole cycle of advertising and marketing of everything. So for 100 years, Everything we've been sold in your first car is never about kids. It's always about have more sex. That's it. It's the only message. And for 100 years, we've been sold this. Every car magazine is only in business because of this message. And that's what this message says. And that's what we're being sold now. It is true. I know they don't make this anymore, and it's gone. But you get the idea. This is an icon. It's just a representative of what's coming. About is a biography, not just of Sully, but of the Airbus team that developed the flight envelope protections. And it analyzes the first Airbus crash under an automated system. It is absolutely mandatory reading. If I meet someone who hasn't read all these books, I almost can't have a conversation with them. I'm not pretending to be an engineer, but I am pretending, or at least trying, to educate myself and everyone I meet as to how to deploy autonomy as quickly as possible. These books are the foundation and articles of that knowledge. So, I also am going to plug my podcast because it's the best. Autonocast is a podcast I do with Ed Niedermeyer and Kirsten Korosek for the last few months. Inspired by Riley Brennan's newsletter, every week we interview someone of interest, and we've interviewed a number of these folks already. If anyone here would like to talk to us, we'd love to hear from you. This is my mother. She's 75 years old. And with her Porsche Boxer she's had for 11 years. She says that you can pry the keys from her cold, dead hands. And when she said that, I'm like, ha ha, very funny. Soon you'll have to be in a self-driving car. And she said, no, literally, you will, because the day I can no longer drive, I've booked a hotel in Switzerland, like a euthanasia spa. I'm done. I'm defined by a life in cars. That's literally what she said. And that's kind of a bittersweet. But then you think about the size of the Top Gear audience. And we've all seen Top Gear, I hope. The last generation who needs their driver's license hasn't been born yet. Urmson and all those dudes were thrown. They were all wrong. People are going to be driving for a long time. And that's because it performs a cathartic function. Even when we hate driving, it performs a cathartic function. So I call myself pro-choice in the war on driving, because there is already a war on driving. Cars registration is a form of tax. We're given speeding tickets all day long. And many places around this country, around the world, use speeding tickets as a form of taxation, and not purely for safety. And we all know that's true. Actually, because nobody cares about safety, not really. So I think that there is one more thing to say. These are the cross-country times starting from 1915 through 2013 of how many hours it took to drive cross-country. And this is selfishly why I believe in autonomous cars, because I think the limit of human skill and the road infrastructure and police patrols and the distance my night vision system I installed can see police cars idling in the middle, and the disguises and the excuses and all the planning, I think no one will ever cross the country in a human-driven vehicle much faster than 28 hours. I think you could shave a little bit of time off that. But if I was in a car which had an augmented driving system, and now I didn't have to worry about my final safety, and I could, say, hire someone to hack it and raise the final speed threshold to 150 miles an hour, because my cross-country drive occurred at 91 miles an hour, which meant cruising speeds of 130 to 140. But if I could increase that to 160 and not have to keep my hands on the wheel, there are two of us in the car, holding binoculars, managing the radios, Googling, using Waze. I think we could get across in 24 hours, and I think that's fantastic. Because no one will get hurt, and I get the glory, and I was that guy still, because I am one of many people who just got to get it out of their system. And for the record, the Cannonball Run still goes on today. The difference is that because everyone who knows anything about this knows you can't get across much faster than 29, and that no matter how much money you have, no matter how many spotter planes you have or bribery money you've got, doesn't matter, it'll never be done, they've decided to turn it to sport. So now the race limits the cars value to under $3,000, which makes it a lot more competitive. And the unbelievable thing is that when these times were 35, 32, everyone was driving a Porsche or Ferrari. But just last week, the start line party was held in my apartment in New York, and there were 22 teams, and they were all driving cars from the 70s that cost under $3,000. Pieces of junk. And these guys are coming across in 30 hours. Because human nature, the will, the id, cannot be defeated when it sets its mind to something. So, And the final slide is the Tesla cross-country times tell us the story of technological evolution and human psychology. Because before I showed up and gave a shit about EVs or Tesla Autopilot, there were people trying to prove that EVs could cross the country and start approaching the internal combustion times. When Cannonball Baker went cross-country 100 years ago, he was hired by Stutz, then Cadillac, to drive internal combustion cars to prove that they were reliable, that the gas station network was big enough to fuel a car and get cross-country in a reasonable amount of time. Does that sound familiar? Because the Tesla guys are trying to prove with every additional supercharger station that they can shave an hour off the time and that EVs will become ubiquitous because stations are ubiquitous. And at the same time, they're trying to prove that autopilot is a great way of doing this with less stress. So the times in a Tesla with autopilot have declined from like 107 hours to 75 to 58. I did 58, then I did 55, and then like 3 weeks later, these two guys who work for Tesla go do it in 53. In a Tesla with a smaller battery pack. So they're learning, Tesla is learning by changing the software managing the battery and the cooling system, the supercharger network's expanding, and then like last week on Instagram, I see pictures of a Model 3 in LA, and 51 hours later, it's in New York. A Model 3's battery pack, that one is 75 kilowatts. I went across in a 90, and these guys shaved 5 hours off my time, which means that Tesla's software is improving at a rate faster even than the battery packs are increasing in power density. It means that the guys driving these cars are studying me and the guys before me and learning, and that the rate of improvement of all these technologies, electric, autonomy, semi-autonomy, there's a lot of room to grow. And the cutting edge of it is happening because people are doing things with these technologies that even their creators didn't expect them to do. So the human id cannot be overcome, and it shouldn't be. It should be appealed to as people are marketed and sold the very technologies intended to improve their lives. That's it. Any questions? Okay.